Pressure mounts on South Korea's President Yoon. The opposition has formally started an impeachment process. The ruling party says they won't back it, but the party chief has asked him to leave the party.
And from political chaos in South Korea to turmoil in France. The French government collapses after Prime Minister Michel Barnier loses a vote of no confidence in Parliament. And the chief executive of a major US health insurance company is shot dead on the streets of New York City. A manhunt is now underway.
Welcome to Newsday. I'm Steve Lai, coming to you from Seoul, and in fact I'm standing in front of South Korea's parliament, where protesters have been calling for his resignation. In fact, you might be able to hear some of them from in front of the front gates here in front of the National Assembly. The opposition also, they are formally introducing an impeachment proceeding, which is up and running at the moment, accusing him of declaring martial law to stop criminal investigations into himself and his family. Now, the ruling People Power Party has decided to vote against that prospective impeachment. That means that unless some of the ruling party members break from their ranks, the motion will not pass. The opposition says they plan to have the vote at 7 p.m. this Saturday. Now, despite not voting to oust him entirely, the party chief of the PPP has asked the president to step down from the party. So it's clear that the President Yoon himself doesn't have the full support of his party. Meanwhile, there have been some other developments to tell you about as well. The defense minister has resigned. He has also claimed full responsibility for the declaration of martial law. Now, South Korea's ambassador to Saudi Arabia has now been nominated to replace him. Plenty of analysis to come, but why don't we start by getting you up to speed with what's been happening here in the last 24 hours with our correspondent Laura Bicker.
This candlelit cam followed a night of chaos. They gathered on the steps of the parliament with one aim: to call for the impeachment of a president who declared martial law.
Because we have a history of defending democracy a few times, the people will strongly defend democracy once more.
I'm out here as a citizen who could not sit by and watch the democracy breaking down.
Resign, the group chanted, before their Mexican wave. Such a different scene from last night's turmoil. President Yoon plunged his country into martial law. Soldiers broke through the windows of Parliament to prevent elected members from overturning his decree. They were unsuccessful. And after 6 hours, Seoul's parliament, not just its president, were back in control. Today, the building bore the scars of that struggle. Repairs have already begun, as has a motion to impeach the president.
If they're willing to violate human rights under martial law, it's obvious that they're also ready to sacrifice people's lives. Stay alert and fight with us.
Protests sprung up in other parts of the city as South Koreans took a moment to reflect. The prospect of martial law brought back chilling memories of authoritarian rule. In the 1970s and 80s, groups of students in Seoul took on dictators, often clashing with riot police and risking their lives. Their defiance and resilience helped South Korea become a democratic country.
South Koreans value their democracy. They fought for it, some died for it. And although they may be questioning just how robust it may be, they've turned out in their thousands to protect it.
But President Yoon remains in power. Some tried to march to his office, but they were blocked by police. It's unclear whether Mr. Yoon hears their calls to resign. But until he does, these demonstrations, however peaceful, will only grow. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Seoul.
Now, when declaring that martial law on Tuesday, President Yoon cited North Korea and anti-state elements as the reason behind it. Now, we are yet to hear any response from Pyongyang, but let's dive into this angle of it a little bit deeper and speak with Andrei Lankov, who's the director of the Korea Risk Group and North Korea News, NK News rather. Andrei, what did you think when you first heard that martial law was declared and that North Korea was given as the reason?
Well, I thought that President Yoon has gone crazy. I thought that he was probably living mentally in the world of the 1960s, in the age of his grandfathers, because all this justification is completely comical. Yes, there is a small number of people on the extreme right, represented in the ruling party, who sincerely believe that the opposition is secretly manipulated by the North Korean agents and Kim Jong-un himself straight from Pyongyang. But it's a bit like, say, United States in the era of Senator McCarthy of the early Cold War, when the American right also believed that everybody who was talking about, gender equality, civil rights was obviously on the payroll of Moscow. However, such people, such delusional ideas are quite small in number. And I was really surprised to see such justification for the president himself. I don't know whether he believes it or not, but it's clearly a complete rubbish. No serious North Korean sympathizers within South Korean society now. There used to be times when some radical students were pro-North Korean, but we are talking about, say, the early 90s, maybe mid-90s. Now, North Korea has absolutely no impact on the South. It's basically the average South Korean sees the North as something pathetic, irrelevant, dirty, poor, slightly comical, and doesn't care about North Korea at all, sometimes excessively so.
But how do you think North Korea will be viewing what's been happening down here in South Korea?
I think they are surprised. They have nothing to do with this story. They were obviously taken by complete surprise by this news, like pretty much everybody around. And they will probably try to do some propaganda domestically and internationally. Nobody's really listening to the international propaganda domestically. They have full control, but they cannot really utilize this situation. They cannot use the situation in any way. So most likely they will make maybe a couple of statements. But now, because they are surprised, it will take time. They're a very bureaucratic society. It will take time for them to decide what they are going to say. They will say something, but the involvement with the situation will be close to zero.
And Andrei, what about the US President-elect Donald Trump? He's set to take office next month. He may have quite a different approach to the Korean Peninsula than President Biden does. How do you think this uncertainty in South Korea is going to affect that?
It's not a good news because Americans under Donald Trump are going to negotiate with North Korea, which is probably a good news. But keeping in mind some, should I say, peculiar features of Mr. Donald Trump, soon to be President Donald Trump, there are fairly high chances that Americans under his watch will not care much about South Korean interest. So right now, South Korean diplomacy needs clear leadership and unity, and in order to use good things which might emerge from likely contacts between the United States and North Korea, but making sure that Americans will not make some deals not favorable for the South Koreans. However, with such a chaos in Seoul, it will be extremely difficult. So it's quite a bad news, actually, because I believe that the current uncertainty will last for a few months.
Okay, thanks, Andrei, for your thoughts today. We do appreciate your time. Andrei Lankov, the Director of Korea Risk Group and NK News as well. Now, the attention is going to be turning to the state of play here in South Korea, to its parliament, with that impeachment looming and set for 7 p.m. here on Saturday. Now, Moon Chung-in, he served as a special advisor to former President Moon Jae-in. He's also been a critic of President Yoon Suk-yeol. He gave me his take on what we've been seeing play out over the past 2 days.
I think it's totally erratic. It's really an unexpected, surprising, shocking, erratic, and unbelievable.
Yeah, if you could elaborate a bit as well as your reaction to the declaration of martial law and how quickly it was sort of taken back.
I think, first of all, the president doesn't really understand what democracy means. He just violated democratic procedure, constitutional foundation. But I was really amazed by the way the opposition party, even ruling party, responded to the martial law. They instantly convened the National Assembly and revoked the martial law. And I think that really shows the democratic resilience and maturity in South Korea.
Yeah, so encouraging sign on that front, perhaps. What do you make then of the impeachment that's been leveled against him? We know that the vote is now being reported to take place on Saturday, but the PPP party seem like they're not going to, they're going to vote to not impeach him.
Yes, now the opposition bloc has 192 seats. In order to pass the impeachment bill, they need 8 more seats, 8 more votes from the ruling party. Therefore, it will depend on what kinds of defection will take place. If more than 8 members of the ruling party join the impeachment bill, then impeachment bill will pass the National Assembly. But it's yet to be seen. But as you pointed out, the ruling party had a special session and agreed to oppose the impeachment bill. Therefore, it is yet to be seen.
Yeah, and the ruling party has also, they've asked him to step down from the party. Do you think that that is likely?
It is very unlikely, but given the past political history, when the president's popularity goes down, they tend to, disengage from the ruling party and sever ties with the ruling party as a way of saving the ruling party. But I don't know whether that will repeat again. But the pressure will be mounting on President Yoon to withdraw from the ruling party membership.
And what about, just want to get your thoughts as well as what we've been seeing with the defense minister offering his resignation, which has been accepted, almost taking the blame and saying that he was responsible for the calling of martial law.
That's not fair. He cannot be a scapegoat. He is a very important part of this martial law conspiracy, but the president should be accountable too, because he alone, the former defense minister Kim Yong-hyun alone, didn't do all these things. The President Yoon Suk-yeol should be accountable to what happened.
So do you think there's a scenario where President Yoon Suk-yeol could remain in office?
Yeah, he was strive to remain office. He'll be making a statement to the Korean people sooner or later, but I think he will make that point very clear, because his argument is first out of anger and frustration, as well as he argues that he declared the martial law in order to eradicate the pro-North Korean anti-state forces. Therefore, he's kind of committed. Therefore, he will try to stay in power. To the extent that people's opposition will be extremely powerful and formidable. Therefore, it's yet to be seen what will happen.
And what do you think this has done for South Korea's reputation on the international stage?
There is 2 aspects. When he declared the martial law, that was the greatest setback to Korean democracy. And then when the National Assembly, revoked the martial law, then all of a sudden, democratic resilience of South Korea, got the world's spotlight. But the one thing is very clear: down and up. But we are on up. If we can handle this chaos smoothly and wisely, and I think that Korea will be shining democracy in the world.
Now, we've been keeping a close eye on what the local media have been reporting as well here in Seoul. This one here has the headline, "Resign President Yoon," along with talking about the candlelit vigil which we saw here on the steps behind me at the National Assembly here last night, and talking about the impeachment as well, the process which has been enacted. This other business newspaper has the headline about the opposition parties calling for the impeachment of President Yoon. Once again, that impeachment vote is set to take place at 7 p.m. This Saturday, though there could be many more twists and turns before we get to that point, and we'll be keeping you up to speed with all of the things as they happen here in South Korea. More online at our bbc.com. Our live page is up and running with regular updates from all the events that are unfolding here in South Korea. Suranjana, back to you.
Many thanks, Steve. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're live with BBC News. Now to the other major political story we're following closely, this time in France. Prime Minister Michel Barnier was ousted late on Wednesday evening after members of Parliament united across the political divide to support a no-confidence motion. That toppled the government, making Mr. Barnier the shortest-serving Prime Minister in French history. Our Paris correspondent Andrew Harding has the story.
Moments before the voting began here in Paris tonight, Michel Barnier made a final, rather forlorn plea to French MPs. The Prime Minister urged them to back him, his government and his budget, or create chaos.
Mesdames et messieurs les députés, je ne me résous pas.
I can't believe a majority of MPs here will vote to destabilize our institutions at a moment where our country is going through a deep moral, economic, financial and civic crisis.
Économique, financière et civique.
But the answer came back fast and conclusive.
Pour l'adoption 331.
The Speaker of Parliament revealing that 57% of MPs had voted no confidence in the government. Politicians from the hard right and hard left of French politics briefly uniting on this one issue.
I don't feel my head spinning, and I don't consider this a victory. We had a choice to make, and the choice we made was to protect French people.
Having tasted blood, many French MPs now want more. Specifically, they want President Emmanuel Macron ousted. Heading home from a trip to Saudi Arabia tonight, a badly weakened president has made it clear he's staying put. It is 62 years since France last found itself in a situation like this. On that occasion, President de Gaulle stood his ground and eventually regained control of Parliament. Today feels rather different. France is in debt, public frustration growing, a nation wrestling, like so many now, with the forces of polarisation and populism. I think it's tragic, says this woman, of today's vote. Nobody is considering the consequences. There's a lot of anxiety, this man adds. I'm upset both with the forces on the left and the far right. Tonight, a government has fallen, but France's political deadlock remains firmly in place. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Paris.
Well, for more on this, we can speak to Romain Fathi, who's a French politics expert at the Australian National University. Many thanks for your time on the programme. I mean, this is quite extraordinary, isn't it? The extreme left and the extreme right working together. What do you think might happen next?
Well, next, France will seek a new government. I mean, in a way, this was expected because the Barnier government was a sort of a placeholder government and, in fact, was a minority government. So we knew from the get-go, from when it was appointed 3 months ago, that its chances of passing bills in the parliament were limited. And this one was a big one, budget for 2025. And as you've mentioned, the far left and the far right united to defeat the government. So now it is a prerogative of the President of the French Republic to appoint a new prime minister. It could be that Emmanuel Macron requires Michel Barnier to return, as happened in 1962 with Georges Pompidou, and tell him to renegotiate the 2025 budget with the far left and the far right. That, however, is unlikely. The second scenario is that Emmanuel Macron will try to broaden his majority to continue to rule from the centre and appoint a Macron-compatible prime minister from the centre-left, or the centre-right. Unlikely too, another scenario is that actually Emmanuel Macron resort to work with the new Popular Front, which is an assemblage of political groups from the left who came first at the last general election for the French lower house, the National Assembly. In which case, France would go from a centre-right government to a left-wing government. But this is not the president's preferred option. So what is going to happen next is anyone's guess. But what is certain, though, is that political instability will continue under the current House because there's no clear majority in that House. It is very scattered and splintered.
Right. That's really interesting because the same situation, it's in South Korea, was over the budget. I mean, briefly, if you can, because we are running out of time, do you think Macron can survive this? We understand that President-elect Trump is going to France this weekend.
Constitutionally, Emmanuel Macron can. He has been mandated by the French people, and his mandate runs out in May 2027. He's both physically and mentally sane, so there's no reason to oust him. Nobody can. In fact, the only way that Macron would go would be on his own volition through resignation. It is very unlikely that President Macron will be resigning. In fact, the conversation about resignation comes from the far left and the far right, who want to create political chaos in France. It is a manufactured situation. It didn't have to be.
Okay, Romain Fathi, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but many thanks for your time. Romain Fathi, French politics expert from the Australian National University. In other news, police in New York City are searching for a person who shot dead the chief executive of one of the United States' largest health insurance companies. Brian Thompson was fatally shot by an attacker just before 7 a.m. on Wednesday. He'd been scheduled to speak at an investor conference later in the day. The 50-year-old father of two was taken to hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Our North America correspondent, John Sudworth, has more from New York.
As Brian Thompson arrived early for his meeting, behind him, a figure can be seen stepping out of the shadows. The gunman fires at least 3 rounds before running away, all caught on CCTV video. The police have released this image showing the suspect moving further away from the scene by bike, and this one revealing part of his face, taken, officers say, minutes before the shooting. Mr. Thompson was CEO of United Healthcare, this country's biggest health insurer, providing cover for some 30 million Americans. As the investigation began, with numbers marking where the shell casings had been recovered, the police said they had little doubt the killing was premeditated.
In Midtown Manhattan early this morning, 50-year-old Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, was shot and killed in what appears, at this early stage of our investigation, to be a brazen, targeted attack. This does not appear to be a random act of violence.
After the shooting, the street here was quickly closed off, and the police investigation has been continuing all day. And while they say they do not yet have a motive, significantly perhaps, Mr. Thompson's wife has given a phone interview to NBC News in which she said her husband had been receiving threats of some kind. And although she didn't go into any detail, that will clearly feed into the investigation. Gun crime in New York is lower than the national average and extremely rare in central Manhattan. Those close by when it happened spoke of their shock.
I mean, it's New York. It's not normal here at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, but it's pretty scary, huh?
I feel so sorry for his family, and no matter what job he has, no matter where he worked or what he done, nobody deserves to be murdered.
For now, the priority is finding the suspect. Police drones, helicopters and dogs and thousands of CCTV cameras are combing the city street by street. And a reward of $10,000 is being offered for information that helps to track him down.
Before we go, we can take you live to Seoul and show you the National Assembly. We are getting some news through that the South Korean president is not going to make any statements today. That's according to his office. We'll be live in Seoul with our teams coming up in a few moments on Business Today. Do stay with BBC News.